Lord Alton. David.
Thank you, and thank you, Minister, and your officials for the very constructive and detailed way in which you engage with this committee. When you gave evidence to us, Minister, during the inquiry on Afghanistan, you raised then, as you did today, the issue of ideology. And, of course, earlier this week we heard how in Saudi Arabia 81 people were executed, that juveniles are being executed. Pretty barbaric things are happening in a number of parts of the world, sometimes in the name of religion. And you described to us during your previous evidence sessions some initiatives you were taking to try and tackle ideology. And I wonder if there's progress, for instance, with scholars at Al-Azhar and things like that, in looking at other ways of interpreting religion and how that can be used as a driver for good rather than one that is negative. You also mentioned in your evidence earlier about the cross-departmental engagement with the MOD and the Home Office. And if I could ask you just a question about ARAP and ACRS, the resettlement programs in the UK, Operation Warm Welcome. The Home Office said that by the end of 2021, everyone would be resettled from the hotels in which they had been placed. This morning, the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Refugees said that there are still 12,000 people in those hotels, and that some of those won't be resettled even in this calendar year. And with the influx of Ukrainians now in large numbers, where will they be left? And what has happened to minorities? During the briefing session, which you and Nigel addressed a few weeks ago on this, which was very welcome, I raised the issue of Hazaras with you, but the Ahmadis and other minorities who aren't even detailed in the lists of people who have been allowed to come to the United Kingdom. And I wonder if that policy could be reviewed as well, so that we can get some idea about ethnicity, about backgrounds, about orientation, about minority issues that put people at particular risk when you're dealing with people like the Taliban.
Thank you. I mean, first of all, on the issue of ideology, the short answer is yes, we are engaging. I've referenced it a few times about countries across the region standing up. And equally, they are very much seized. There are a number of ministers within key countries who are very much focused on this and ensuring that they deliver the kind of message that is required. Just to name one or two, specifically Indonesia has been very constructive. And Retno Marsudi, the foreign minister of Indonesia, shared with me her first meeting with the Taliban in Doha, where she went through. There was a long narrative from the Taliban about how women cannot hold senior roles. And she said, I sat there, Tariq, and listened very carefully. And after their 20 minutes or so, I then responded by saying, I'm clearly a woman. I'm also Muslim. And thirdly, I'm foreign minister of the biggest Muslim country in the world. And there was a kind of silence to that. And there is something, before we get on to scholars, I think a message in that we have some exceptional women leaders across the world and within the Islamic world. The second most senior person within the UN framework is, of course, Amina Mohammed, who heads up all the development area. And I think what we need to do collectively is ensure it's not kind of voice. I hate this phrase, so the voice of women are heard. They have voices. You know, women are already here and present. It's about ensuring that we make that a key priority in engagement with the Taliban, because that has to be something which will address the narrative head on. Secondly, with the scholars, absolutely, with their neighbouring countries, I myself have engaged, but also, more importantly, through the IOC. We've talked directly to the leadership there about the importance of the correct Islamic narrative in this case. But as I said, that challenge in my mind must come from the Islamic world, the Muslim world, in saying that this is not, when you talk about rights of minorities and protections, you could allude to the Medina Charter as a fundamental example of protection of minority rights. So I think there is, again, work to be done in this, but just to assure you, that is part of our engagement. Secondly, on the issue of how we are working with minorities, it's a key concern. I think on the Hazaras, yes, there have been some who've come through other parts and borders. The situation of the Ahmadis is very, very serious in Afghanistan. And without, again, going into specific details, we are engaging, but also the issues are extremely sensitive. And these particular communities, religious minorities, are particularly vulnerable. Just in terms of qualification for settlement, of course, when the ACRS was announced, one of the key categories, which was mentioned was, of course, vulnerable communities, but vulnerable religious minorities. So as the scheme evolves, certainly it's my intention, and I continue to make those representations to our colleagues in the Home Office to ensure that these communities are also provided sanctuary. And your second question, but coming to it thirdly on hotels, whilst it's obviously very much at the behest of the Home Office, I think what's very, very clear is the settlement of those people in hotels continues. Last week, I think it was just before Victoria Atkins handed over to our new minister, who will be in the House of Lords, of course, Lord Harrington, and I'm sure there'll be opportunities to pose questions to him, and indeed I heard his dulcet tones this morning on various radio channels. But I know Richard, and he worked tremendously hard during the Syrian settlement, and I think there was no one more capable, perhaps, or with the right experience to deploy in this instance. In paying tribute to Victoria's work, last week we met with some of the women who have now settled here to hear quite directly from them about how they were finding it, what were their current issues. And what we should do is, Victoria wrote a very good summary letter of what's been achieved so far on resettlement. And what I'll do with the Chair's permission, we'll make sure, and with Victoria's permission, I hope she won't mind me speaking for her, circulate it to members of the committee as well.
Do you think that with 82 million people displaced as displaced people or refugees worldwide, but it's time for the United Kingdom government to take a global initiative, not unlike COP26, but to bring together nations to examine the scale of this issue and to put something together like the Marshall Aid Programme after the Second World War, so that we can start tackling this issue at root, because otherwise there are going to be migrants coming in their millions over the years to countries that won't want to welcome them.
I think it's an idea. I think one of my recent experience, I think, from one crisis to the next. I mean, the situation we're seeing in Ukraine right now, and even if I go back 2 years, etc. Whilst there were concerns, and clearly the committee report was very clear at that time on Afghanistan, I don't think anyone could have imagined the scale of what we're seeing currently engulfing Europe. So, whilst mindful, and I think we do need to look at global solutions on issues of migration and settlement, the challenge will remain, in my view, is about internal displacement, internally displaced people. We see that in Afghanistan, we see it in Ukraine, and sadly and tragically other conflicts as well. If you, for example, go to Tigray, there's a continuing situation on all fronts, and whilst the world's focus is currently and rightly on Ukraine, I think we're very keen not to lose sight of these issues. And I think that's where the institutions of the UN have a key role to play. Whilst they need reform, they need, at times, urgency within them. My main concern in the current crisis is that what emerges in terms of the world order is one that substantially strengthens the institutions of the UN. Because frankly speaking, and we have this debate about the most effective support in terms of distribution and aid, but both the crisis in Afghanistan and indeed the crisis in Ukraine has shown that often the first people on the ground who have access, who are able to leverage some of these humanitarian corridors, be it in Syria, be it in Yemen, be it in Afghanistan, or be it indeed in Ukraine, are the key UN agencies.
Thank you very much.
Minister, thank you. And